Today, we will be looking at Franklin D. Roosevelt and his program, the New Deal, to deal with the Great Depression. In the election of 1932, it was the consensus of most people around the country that the Republican President, Herbert Hoover, wasn't doing enough to help people cure themselves, to help the country cure itself of the Great Depression. Americans were looking for someone that would bring about change, anyone really, and it fell to Franklin D. Roosevelt, who became the Democratic nominee for president in 1932. Roosevelt had served previously as governor of the state of New York. He had contracted polio in the 1920s when he himself was in his 20s. And he would be rarely, even though he lost the use of his legs, he was rarely seen in public without the use of a wheelchair or crutches. He wanted people to have the image of him as someone who was physically strong to match his mental and emotional stability. And so cartoonists would often depict FDR in very strong sort of ways, very able-bodied, even though in real life he really wasn't. Roosevelt had a great way of communicating with the average citizen. In his first inaugural address, he proposed to the nation, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. He also gave regular radio addresses that became known as fireside chats. These were little pep talks that were given to the people and to kind of keep them informed and up to date about the latest things that his administration and the government were doing to try to improve their lives and to help the economy of the country get moving again. Families would gather around the radio in their living rooms to listen to the president deal with these topics. And people got a sense and they felt very encouraged that they had finally had a president now who was willing and ready to do something about the Great Depression and trying to help the country recover. So, what was Roosevelt's plan? Well, when Roosevelt began campaigning in 1932, he promised a new deal for everyone. If he was talking to farmers, he would talk about his new deal for farmers. If he was talking to coal miners, he would say that we have a new deal for coal miners and teachers and writers and bankers and everyone that he would come across. He promised them something as part of this new deal. However, he was very vague initially about what was going to be included in this New Deal. One of the first things that Roosevelt did upon his inauguration were to establish bank holidays throughout the country. He closed all of the nation's banks until they could get an influx of cash into them and that the banks could prove themselves strong enough to be able to reopen and be able to meet the demands of both depositors and people that were withdrawing their money. He also surrounded himself with some of the best and brightest people that he could find, and these advisors of his became known as his brain trust. Included in this brain trust were a couple of cabinet members. This lady right here by the name of Frances Perkins became the first female cabinet member in any president's administration. She served as Secretary of Labor for Roosevelt throughout all of his 12 plus years in office. She's given credit for some great accomplishments of the New Deal, including Social Security, unemployment, as well as establishing a minimum wage. Harold Ickes was another very important person in Roosevelt's cabinet who happened to be a Republican, even though FDR was a Democrat. Ickes was Roosevelt's Secretary of the Interior and was put in charge of some of the big major public works programs that Roosevelt's New Deal created, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration, both of which we'll learn a little bit more about later today. But perhaps Roosevelt's closest, most trusted advisor was his First Lady, the woman he referred to as his eyes and ears. Even though he physically wasn't able to get around to every single place that he would have wanted to go to, his First Lady Eleanor did, and she often would report back to the president on the types of conditions that she would see when she would go out and meet with people that were living in slum and rotten conditions. As part of the New Deal and all of the programs that it created, Roosevelt's aims were these three. The programs of the New Deal needed to, 1, provide relief. Relief was the immediate help, either direct or indirect, to help people right now. And a lot of times, instead of just giving people a handout, they would try to find some sort of job that they could do to make a little bit of money. For example, money was given to people that could come and shovel off the sidewalks during winter for the city, and they would get money for that. They would be given money to improve certain or plant trees or help to improve the parks in their local communities. And this immediate relief wasn't going to be something that people could count on in the long run, but it was definitely something that could help them get by for the time being. Secondly, we have recovery. These were temporary programs that were going to be there to try to help out businesses and to help get the economy moving again. Sort of thinking of it as priming the pump. If you want to get a well going or a pump from a well, you have to sometimes put water into it, and then it's able to kind of kickstart and really pump out a whole lot more. And the same kind of thing with the businesses. If you give the businesses an incentive to start hiring more people, or if you give them some sort of tax breaks, they might then do something to try to help out the local workers and other businesses in their area. The third R is for reform. Reform are these permanent changes that are put in place to try to prevent another depression from happening again, such as the stock market crash. The New Deal creates a program to help monitor and regulate the stock exchange so that it prevents major crashes like the ones that we saw on Black Thursday and Black Tuesday from happening again. Now, during Roosevelt's FDR's first 100 days in office, 15 major pieces of legislation, most of them related to the New Deal, are enacted by Congress. One of the most proficient uses of congressional time to accomplish major tasks in the nation's history. Now, many of these New Deal programs that get created, like the AAA and the CCC and the WPA and the PWA and the CWA, all are known by many acronyms. And because of that, one gets the idea that Roosevelt was sitting in the White House one day and he was trying to think up a New Deal program to create. And he would dunk his spoon into his bowl of alphabet soup, and up would come these different letters like PWA. And he says, we're going to call this the Public Works Administration. And he would dip his spoon back in again, and it comes up with the letters FDIC. And he says, we're going to create a program to try to help the banks, and we're going to call it FDIC. And then he scoops another one out, and well, you get the idea. Now what we're going to do is to look at some of these programs that are created as part of the New Deal in our activity called Alphabet Soup. So now let's find our assignment and let's spend the rest of the time that we have today working on this and getting this turned in.